Okay, cyber conflicts. We've just been hearing about this. In fact, it's been a theme all day. We're going to be talking about some of the lessons and strategies, and this panel convenes many perspectives. Here we have national perspectives, we have regional perspectives, public and private sector, but most critically, we've got real-world perspectives, and that's what we're going to be sharing with you so that we can draw lessons and strategies from them. Now, whilst we've been hearing about the physical attacks on Ukraine's power grid this weekend, cyber attacks targeting critical infrastructure, national security, and economic development are a daily reality in Ukraine, around the globe, and these are continually becoming more and more sophisticated. Let's start off by hearing how so. Let's find out actually from a number of you your perspectives on how state-sponsored attacks are growing, how they are evolving, and how their impacts are evolving. Gert, let's hear your Estonian perspective first. Go for it.
Thanks, and it's a real pleasure to be here and see such a big crowd, and wonderful always with Tallinn Digital Summit. So, concerning the topic you mentioned, and resilience would be the word I would focus on most, and also keeping in mind what Sandra Joyce in the morning from Google said about the ongoing attacks on critical infra throughout Europe and the Western world. Well, this is the new reality. This is something that we all need to adhere to. This is something that we all need to take into our planning phase. And the main focus that needs to change is at the CEO, at the executive level of our critical infra companies, of our government, to put this risk planning, this new reality where we exist into practice. And we can either mitigate these risks, accept them, or take steps. In Estonia alone, in the first 10 months of this year, we've had 4,950 cyber incidents with an impact. What does it mean? And cyber incident with an impact, it is an incident where the attacker achieves their goal, whether fully or partly, but they get to see something that they shouldn't, they get to steal data that they shouldn't, they get to change data or steal funds. So this is the new reality, and we are simultaneously under a constant sort of wave or threat of attacks from both the advanced persistent threat APTs and also the classic cyber criminals who do it with the purpose of stealing your funds. So these two things simultaneously coming our way. And to top off my idea, we definitely have witnessed over the course of the full-blown Russian aggression and war in Ukraine that cyber attacks are a formal part of the Russian diplomacy toolbox now. If you say something they don't like, if you do something they don't like, if you decide something they don't like, a cyber attack is imminent and follows. But there's no cause for panic. You can mitigate this, you can take steps, you can be ready, and you can make sure that whether the impact is minimal or that if you get hit and if you get put on your knees, then you get back up, and you get back up quickly and efficiently. With this, I stop.
We're going to come to some of those steps that you can do just shortly, but I want to get an idea of how things are evolving. Juhan, can you give us a European perspective? How do you see the state-sponsored cyber attacks are evolving and their impacts are changing? What's going on? What's the landscape from your perspective?
Thanks for inviting me. Glad to be back in my hometown. Now, some things that I will say are already publicly available, so the data points that I will use is essentially coming from the ENISA threat landscape report that was published in September in an event. Gert was present there as well. So what do we see? First of all, of course, the war in Europe, the kinetic conflicts that we see in the Middle East, they are very much driving the cyber threat landscape. And clearly, these are in turn driven by sovereign actors. So they're very much present in the cyber threat landscape, and they do mold the way that things are evolving. The other thing that we see is when it comes to threats against availability have become real big issue. Less impactful. I mean, we see a number of DDoS attacks that actually, they don't even raise an eyebrow, but it's a constant noise. And it's used for political purposes. Also, the other thing that we see is that the boundaries between the threat actors are becoming murkier. We can't really say, we have only ransomware groups or we only have hacktivists. So these things are getting closer to the state actors. And finally, I think one important thing is that we understand that we are a target. It is not a specific sector only, but if you look at the biggest targeted sectors, it's the public administration, it's our democracies that are under threat. 19% of the attacks that we observed, and what we look normally is that we look year by year on the most impactful incidents that have happened in EU, more than 11,000. Out of these 11,000 incidents, 19% targeted at public administration. When it goes to specific businesses, so we see transport, banking, energy, following up, but twice as less. So clearly, the aim is to disrupt, cause panicky emotions, or undermine our democratic government. The other thing is that they are not targeting single member states. More and more we see attacks that target 2 or more member states. Out of the 11,000 incidents that we observed last year, more than 300 were specifically targeting more than one member state. So it is getting also more complex, the spillovers are bigger, and yeah, I would invite everybody to read from our threat landscape how it's going.
Definitely. It's not just about sort of threatening the infrastructure, it's undermining that confidence level as well. Phil, from your US perspective, we heard from Harry Coker this morning. What do you see as being sort of like the emerging, the edge of the cyber attacks and the threats out there?
Well, thank you for having me back in Tallinn. It's always a good time to be here, but especially during the Tallinn Digital Summit. I did not have as long of a commute as Gert. Kidding. But I think really the operative word is evolution, is what we're seeing. It's been almost 40 years since Cuckoo's Nest saw the very first cyber attack, which was a vulnerability concerning a confidentiality. It has been about 15 years since Russia had its tantrum and DDoS attacks against Estonia, which was an availability attack. It's been about 15 years since Stuxnet. No, I take that back. It's been about 10 years since Stuxnet, and we saw the first integrity attack. What we're now seeing is an evolution away from adversaries trying to break systems and more to leveraging those systems for their own nefarious purposes. So what we're seeing are ongoing espionage attacks within our networks that are targeting not necessarily that network directly, but rather the supply chain behind that network. It's a more nefarious way to get past our defenses because we are getting pretty darn good at defending ourselves against cyber attacks. So this forces an evolutionary response by our adversaries. They're starting to get inside our supply chains. They're using social media in order to get to the public directly. And then, of course, we are beginning to see pre-positioning within our critical infrastructure, and not just our own critical infrastructure, by the way, by adversaries as a message, a warning over what they might be able to do in case of actual hostilities in the future. So this really marks an evolutionary moment where we move beyond what we have seen under that traditional CIA triad, where someone's trying to disrupt, degrade your capabilities, instead are using that to benefit themselves. It's almost like an HIV moment where they're attacking the immune system response itself.
Thank you, Phil. And in fact, that goes back to many of the things we heard from Sandra Joyce, Google, this morning. Anna, Google provides infrastructure to the Ukrainian government. Can you share with us just your real-world perspective of what is actually going on, the volume, the number of attacks in Ukraine over the last year, cyber attacks, and how these are evolving? What are some of the strategic learnings you're taking away from them?
Yeah, sure. Of course, not a lot of data is available that we can share publicly, but what we can look at the trends that between 2020 and 2022, there was a surge of 250% of attacks against Ukrainian users and 300% against NATO countries. So this trend is obvious. And what I want to highlight here is that cybersecurity is a process. It's always a process, it's never a final result, and it's about how we adaptability to those novel threats. So when we're looking at the trends, and we can highlight what are the major trends looking for the past 4 years of how many years, like now full-scale invasion, 1,000 days, right? So the major one is, of course, the attacks against critical infrastructure. That is a major target. That is demanding the trust to the services that can be provided unstoppably to the users. And this undermining the trust to access to digital services also influences, it creates like psychological pressure on population. So we have to combine it as asymmetric, huge amount of strategy here. Second, it's adaptability and new kinds of threats. So, for example, a recent report by threat intelligence analyst group at Google found out that malware distribution was hijacked at Telegram. So we find those adaptability and new threats. And the third, that is really, really core one that I want to bring more in our discussion is, of course, like how we build this resilience. It's about cooperation. And of course, public-private partnership, we are discussing it always, but how important it is. Because resilience, it's about several gaps. It's about communication, it's about capacity distribution, the capabilities distribution. So of course, private sector and companies, they have more access to those technologies, but without sharing information about those threats and novel attacks, we won't achieve that level of resilience and providing sustainable access to digital services to population. And the third one, and the fourth one is actually undisrupted access to truthful information. Because DDoS attacks, what they prove is that disturbing the image of how the state services are provided, how the private services are provided, is basically making a big attack on user-facing information provision. And here you go. It's a huge combination of psychological pressure, trust building, and resilience.
Okay, so we've got a perspective here of how the cyber conflict is evolving, how it's emerging, and the speed at which it's going also. Let's now turn to you all, and this panel is about lessons and strategies. How are you evolving your strategies to actually protect then your economic stability, your national security? Juhan, Europe, what are you doing to ensure that we are running at this double speed we need to keep up with this conflict?
I think part of the game is to have a good situational picture so that you can build a even better foresight of where the things are going. I don't think that we are there yet. I think there is a lot more that we can do in order to share data, understand the data better, have taxonomies in place so that we can actually talk to each other across public and private spheres between Ukraine, US, Europe. But I think if we look at the critical infrastructure that we have in Europe and the critical sectors that are under the NIS directive, which is the directive for high common level measures of cybersecurity, a new iteration which is just now came into force finally. And we do a study every year. We survey the critical entities under it. So this year on Thursday, we are going to publish our new NIS investment report. One thing that emerges from there is, though that there is an uptick of cybersecurity investments as a percentage from the IT budgets, it's going to very basic stuff. And when we look at the supply chain security that was mentioned, and when we look at the new technologies, only 4% of the 1,400 companies that we surveyed invest to make themselves post-quantum encryption safe. 4%. It's a tip of an iceberg. And when we talk about future-proofing our cybersecurity capabilities, this is the key. So we have a long road to cover in order to make sure that actually our critical infrastructure becomes resilient for the future. We don't see that now, and I think it's time to really take the emergency bells out and start ringing them.
Certainly, if we're going to be using foresight and preparedness, then that 4% definitely needs to come up. Phil, in the US, what are you guys doing to evolve your strategies?
Yeah, I think I would start with our national cybersecurity strategy that we released a little over 2 years ago. And I really like this analogy that the Prime Minister spoke of running twice as fast, because this is an insight that we had when we wrote our strategy, is that we historically think of cybersecurity as operating within the national security realm. And so that's only running at half total speed, so that's just one time. But what you really need to do is you also have to run again within economic prosperity. And what we saw within our strategy is when you begin merging economic prosperity with national security, now you can start getting things done. When you only focus on one of these issues, you're really just running against all these headwinds. It's all national security. It means everything's classified. You're not sharing it. You're not doing a good job on public-private partnership. But when you're only on the economic prosperity side, you're thinking about job growth, but you're not looking at all the threats of technology that's also coming in. Merging these two together, making sure that you're focusing on both national security as well as economic prosperity, is something that our office has been able to do within the White House to help really pour some gas on how quickly we are advancing cybersecurity as a whole across our nation. So I think that's one insight that we really had. Another insight, this really should come as no surprise to anyone in this room because you've been hearing it all day, is that there's nothing that we can do by ourselves. My country is very self-reliant. We have this idea of a frontiersman on the range, a cowboy, right, acting all by themselves. But you can't do that within this space. We are too interconnected. We are too reliant upon one another, and that's a good thing. So making sure that we're working not just at the national level, also at the subnational level, but also at the international level, so that we're beginning to build a way of thinking about these processes, a way of talking with our colleagues that, again, bring in this national security economic prosperity model so that we're all going to be more secure and more prosperous if we do it right.
I mean, let's be honest, the aggressors out there, they're sharing their playbooks, they're working together. We are doing, but we maybe should be doing more of the same. Gert, Estonia, looking to you, what are you doing to share and evolve your strategies, both here in Estonia, but then also with your neighbors around about within Europe?
So building on what Phil said a little bit here, we also have a brand new cybersecurity strategy, just a few months old, and the super intelligent lady who is the main author of this, Mario Hendre, is sitting there in the back in a white jacket. Just grab her sleeve and ask for the tips. I'm not going to go into the strategy itself, but the main lessons are exactly what you stipulated. I mean, we shouldn't always invent the bicycle again. If we look at the cases and complete chapeau to Ukraine, to Anna and Valeria before, the way you've handled this pressure, I mean, most of the time people have still been able to go to a grocery stop and buy food or gas up their car or use the ATM card to pay and electricity in and out, but it's still there. All of these things that I'm mentioning are connected to information systems. All of these things are connected to internet. All of these things are super aggressively being attacked. So these are the lessons that you need to stipulate. And all of you in the audience, wherever you come from, I mean, look at these plans. The main message from me is to have a plan. Years ago, ships didn't have lifeboats. Now they do. They have life jackets for everyone. Have you ever used one? That's another question, but at least you know that the lifeboat is there, the life jacket is there, you can use it. So this is the lesson learned that we are doing at the moment. Next week, we're going to start again our Cyber Reserve largest exercise of the year, the Civilian Cyber Reserve together with the Defense League cyber unit. I don't even know yet what the scenario is because I'm a player in this, but we are really testing these things through real time, not tabletop exercises, but actual real exercises to be ready for the worst, because we see that the worst is happening already. It's coming. It's not something theoretical. It's something that we live in right now.
Definitely, very much now, right here and right now. I'm going to pull into now the public and private sector, because we've talked about we can't be these lone cowboys out there on the range. We've got to pull together. And I want us to move over into the part that you brought up, Gert, just a little earlier, threat prediction, incident reporting, crisis management. I mean, we need to be out there and being resilient, but this foresight that you mentioned, Juhan, here, Anna and Phil, representing then the public and the private here, can you share with us some real-world examples of where and how the public-private collaboration is advancing and innovating for cyber resilience. Anna, I'm going to come to you first, Google and Mandiant.
Yes. So, of course, at Google, there are several directions that work closely, specifically on these questions. And, for example, the case of malware distribution on Telegram, that information was shared, like, beforehand with government agencies. That's why this continuous cooperation and sharing of information when we spot some suspicious behavior, this is so crucial. But I want to transit a bit even further because, again, cybersecurity, it's an ecosystem building. It's not just about government institutions and technological big players or small players. It's actually about population, small and medium enterprises, general public. And here, what I wanted to highlight, how much of efforts we are putting on providing this education to SMBs on how to become cyber conscious, and even the basic steps of two-factor verification, of changing passwords, of keeping this cyber hygiene, because it starts really from basically us. Also providing quite a good number of educational programs for general public. And that's why this understanding of ecosystem approach to cybersecurity is so crucial, because again, as I mentioned in the beginning, it's about building trust of access to critical digital services. And of course, I live in Kyiv, and when we have attacks, and those attacks are targeting primarily critical infrastructure, then we know, for example, after missile attacks, we won't have electricity for the next 2 hours. You have to regroup, you have to understand where to get verified information. That's why it goes really, really aligned with access to trusted information channels, and then there is a disruption there. So again, ecosystem approach.
Definitely. And in fact, educating and working with the SME is one way in which we can get that 4% number up, hopefully. Phil?
I think every country is going to say the exact same thing, which is we're terrible at public-private partnership. So let me say, in the United States, we're terrible at public-private partnership, but we are far worse 1,001 days ago. We spent a lot of cycles within the White House thinking about, should we go public with the intelligence that we have that Russia is about to invade? And we decided to do this because we wanted people to be ready. But now what do? You've told the world that Russia is going to invade. How do you prepare for invasion day +1? And so that's when we really began working with the private sector extensively. And the idea here is that historically, private sector doesn't overly trust government. They think if they share something with the government, we're going to use it against them in either regulation or bringing a lawsuit against them, right? It's not going to be in their overall interest long-term to share with the government. From the government side, do we necessarily trust the private sector? Are they trying to just make money off of selling me another product that I already have 5 copies of, right? But here, it was a breakthrough moment 1,001 days ago when we began sharing with the private sector and telling them what we knew. And providing this level of intelligence that we have not historically done. And we began reading in a lot of CEOs to classified information so that we could share individual information of, we think your sector is going to be targeted this way. We think your company might get hit this way. And what we began to see was this melding of data. There's a lot of good data in the private sector, probably far better than what we have. But when we can have that trusted relationship with the private sector, we can begin melding together some intelligence that they have and we have, we start to have something very interesting. And that becomes almost like a weather report. We can tell you that there's likely to be a tornado in your area. You need to decide, does that mean do I board up the windows? Does that mean that I go into a cellar? What does that mean for me? But we should be able to share that information with the private sector. And the one benefit of 1,000 days ago is that we have begun to do that. We have new tools like the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative that CISA runs that brings together the private sector into a digital room so they can share what they are seeing among various players without having to worry about antitrust or regulation or anything else there, because that improves the overall defensibility of each of those companies. So that's something new that we are doing. We are still seeing the long tail of where that goes. obviously, I think it's a far better world now that we have unleashed this capability of melding together that public and private information. And hopefully, I can tell you in 1,000 days from now that we are far better at public-private partnerships than we are today.
Okay, so see you back here in 3 years for that check-in. And Gert, here in Estonia, the sharing public-private, are you sharing data and information like the US Phil here? What are you guys up to?
Absolutely. I mean, we are not alone in this. There are no borders in cyberspace. And the same attack, I mean, with Latvia and Finland, for me, it's basically we are the same country because the same critical infra operators, the banks, the telcos, all of them are the same operating in Riga, in Tallinn, in Helsinki, so on and so forth. And with the US as well, whatever attack comes our way, we need to give them the heads up or vice versa. And with Ukraine, naturally the same. It's a constant evolving sort of living being where we operate in. But I would love to touch upon the supply chain element as well with a few words. I mean, and coming from a national perspective and even narrowing it down to the SMEs and to the critical infra companies, the number one lesson learned for us is that so many dependencies exist there that the CEOs of the companies have no idea of. So perhaps during the last 2 years, they have hired a chief information security officer. They have bought in some services to protect their systems. They have built the sort of shield around them. But they are clueless that the accountancy firm that is providing their accountancy is completely vulnerable. And in the contract between the two companies, it's not even stipulated. So these are the cases, these are the sort of the psychological realities hitting home now that people have to think about this, that I can't only protect my own home, I sort of have to protect the whole village, then the whole county and the whole country. So these are the lessons that we are learning in this developing times.
Definitely. And as you just said, in fact, there is sort of no borders when it comes to cyber conflict. I would love us to think about this now because in the lessons and strategies, we've been thinking about it from quite a national perspective, a public and a private sector. But of course, we know that these attacks now and part of their evolving, how can I say, sophistication is that they spread across borders. So let's drill down into that. Juhan, how here in the EU are you increasing public-private collaboration? What else are you doing to actually mitigate the risk of cyber conflicts escalating across the European borders?
I was quite stunned, actually, when I heard a colleague from the US saying that they are not doing public-private partnership in a good way. So, I mean, well, I go to CInqC and learn from them. Let's say that. So I think there are structural measures that we have put in place, which the legislature actually has put in place in order to ensure that we do have cross-border collaboration, exchange of information. The CCERT network, which is one of the oldest cross-border networks in the world, actually, was established by the NIS1 directive 2016. Is the maturity there? I mean, they still have a long way to grow, I would say. But I think we do have structural measures at the technical level, and now with the NIS2 also at the operational level with the Cyclone, which is essentially the executives of the cybersecurity agencies of our member states. Now I think the shortcoming of the current model is really that when it comes to public-private sector partnership, these are existing in the national level, but we don't have something similar when it comes to a transnational level. So we are building it up step by step, and I think we are building it up in two ways. The first is we are running something which we call a Trusted Partnership Program. I'm very happy that Google Mandiant is actually one of our partners, together with a number of European actors and other American actors. So that's part of the road we are taking, something similar that CInqC is doing in the US. For the benefit of of these structured networks that I've just mentioned, for the CCERT network, and not doing it for ourselves, we're doing it for our member states. And we've seen that when they are, attacks against the infrastructure that we all share in the digital space, it is useful to have a one-stop shop where the owner of the infrastructure, the service provider, can come to Europe and brief what is happening, and all the 27 member states are there. And on the other side, we are trying to upgrade our partnerships with our good allies and partners like the US. signed a year ago a cooperation arrangement with CISA, with Ukraine, with triple CSP. Yeah, wow. I remember this, and the Security Council. So I think we need these kind of multiple level arrangements. As Gert said as well, we need to train and exercise now so that when, pardon my French, shit hits the fan, we already know who to talk to and how to enable quick responses, because I think that's crucial. I mean, we've heard, the pace of things is getting quicker and quicker. Our response need to be quicker as well, and I think we are not yet there in this sense. Plus, of course, when it comes to the overall, frameworks, I think we need to become better at also utilizing the private sector experience of understanding, do these policies work? Do they add value? And I just take another commercial break and and invite everybody to participate in ENISA public consultation that we just launched. It runs up until 9th of December. And it's about the technical guidelines that we are building on top of the implementing act of the NIS2, which is focusing on critical entities in the digital infrastructure. So if you have a stake, if you have an understanding what works, what doesn't work, please take part in our public consultation.
Okay, fantastic. And continuing on this theme, I think of information sharing in order to build out the foresight there and to try and stop the escalation across the borders. Anna, Google's working then with many organizations, including those SMEs that are working across the borders. What are you guys doing to try and stop the risk of these cyber, when maybe we see organizations being hit and affecting them across borders?
That's actually where it's critical for local team to be present and to have this all continuous information exchange. Its first step is building protocols for information exchange. As simple as it is, it's only 3 months for me at this position, but I see how we effectively cooperating with government, and I think that's a baseline that you have to nail. That there are so many teams at companies, there are so many teams at government sector. So it's first is building communication. Because again, how resilience is built, it's communication, it's shared values, and I think what I would like to highlight is that with what we see that cybersecurity attacks are highly geopolitically driven. They can be directly state-sponsored. They can be through proxies, but they are highly geopolitically driven. So we are located in the area of geopolitical unity. So what's important here is how we share information, how we build the trusted relationship. That's first. And second, again, to highlight here is that cooperation on education. So here in audience, there is my colleague Nina, who is on board of CDTO campus. It's Chief Digital Transformation Officers in Ukraine. It's a distributed network of chief digital transformation officers with whom we are cooperating that distribute all these digitalization frameworks. And it's so important to engage and to share more educational materials that would provide more information about novel attacks, because they're changing, and adaptability has to be 24/7, not already in terms of weeks or months. So 3C SIP, they publish all-time reports, and they per day around 1,000 attacks. And here about sharing how to cope, how to build those protocols on when you're providing digitalization on level of ministries, on regional levels, on municipality levels, providing education to SMEs and providing education to general public. And it can sound like really generic words, but it's huge amount of work. It's huge amount of work of launching such educational programs. And they really, really make effect, because after launching one program, we had a registration of 5,000 people in 48 hours. So there is a demand of being AI conscious and cyber conscious, and to have an access to novel tools and understand more how to apply them and how to be more resilient on using them.
As you say, sounds basic, but it's fundamental. Juhan, you wanted to make a comment on this?
Very quick remark on this, a very, very important aspect actually. skills. And when we talk about foresight as well, in the ENISA foresight report, we actually say skill shortage is number 2 threat to ensure cybersecurity in the long term. And we've seen that as well in the NIST investment report, that year by year, the critical entities tell us they want to hire more cybersecurity experts. Actually, 90% of our respondents say they want to hire more, but they lack the skills across all different profiles in cybersecurity. And the real numbers in terms of FTEs per, if you look at the IT personnel and how many of these are dealing with cybersecurity and information security, are going down because there's a lack of shortage. So the only way you can actually address it is also via partnership between public and private sector. So very important work that Google and a number of others are undertaking there.
Definitely, there is a skills shortage out there, and that's where we need to make sure also that our accountants aren't bringing in North Korean consultants, as we heard earlier. Phil, from the White House and the US perspective, what are you doing to actually ensure that, or try and ensure that cyber conflicts are not escalating across borders?
I mean, the biggest thing that we can do is working closer with our partners and our allies, because fundamentally, we're not going to prohibit future cyber conflicts. It's going to be a part of life. How do you constrain it? How do you keep it isolated? How do you keep it within the normal bounds of what you accept as state-to-state action? That's a damn good question. Right now, our approach is to share our intelligence, share what we think is coming. We're already highlighting what we think is going to be coming in 2027, an opening window where you may have a PRC action. So how can we prepare for these moments ahead of time? We do it by information sharing. We do it with our, again, our partners and allies. There are few better allies than we have than Estonia, as well as the rest of NATO. How do we ensure that we are all exercising so that we know how to do these things and do them better? And then how are we bringing in more of the private sector? But I would also like to highlight the skills shortage as well. This is one of the biggest impediments that we have to having better cybersecurity within our country, is that we have roughly 500,000 open cyber jobs in our country. Some would say it's 3/4, some say it's half. All I know is it's going up, not down. And so one of the things that we're trying to do to get ahead of that, is that we have the people to respond to a future conflict, is that we're moving away from college-based degrees being a prerequisite to working within this field. Instead, we're beginning to look at how do you do skills-based hiring? How can I determine that someone has the capability to do this work and do it well, so that I can bring them in now and they can begin getting on-the-job training within the federal government? How can they then take that training, go to the private sector where they're going to get even better, and over time maybe come back to me as well? So this is one of the biggest things that we're working on right now, is ensure that we have the people to do this work and ensure that we have the people to do the information sharing in the future. We're bringing a greater number of Americans into the system by removing that barrier of a college degree.
Okay, we have just a few minutes left on the clock here, but I want to make this super practical, super pragmatic for the audience here and for anyone else who's watching. So if we want to be skilling up, recruiting better, sharing information, collaborating, all of these things, anyone who's out there who wants to very quickly do this, either a private organization or maybe they're working in the public sector, who should they turn to? Phil, for the US, who's the point of contact? We can call you out.
You saw my eyes go, yeah, right.
How do we do this? It's the best way in.
Well, I don't need everyone to do everything all at once. I need them to do what they already do well. Right? I used to have this response for the private sector when I worked in the private sector. The government wants you to do this. If your core mission is over here, don't bring yourself over here and try and do a government mission poorly. Instead, start working with the government to convince them that what they really need is what you already do. So I would not advocate that people start shifting away from where their core capabilities and responsibilities are, but do what they do better. And start thinking about the broader mission. I mean, one of the last, I know we're starting to run low on time here, but the democratic system that we have jointly created across the globe has produced immense amounts of profit for the private sector. They need to defend that. And they have a stake here as well in defending democratic systems, defending democratic norms. And so whatever element you heard Director Coker highlight how we need leaders across 5 key areas, if you can do one of those, please, we want to work with you. Whether that's through our CISA, whether that's through ENISA, whether that's through Estonia, whether that's through private sector, we need you in this. And there's a role for you to play here. So by all means, talk to any of us. We'll find a way to bring you into the systems that you are part of the defenders of democracy across the globe.
Okay. And in terms of reaching out, though, Anna, you're new in your role in Google in Ukraine. You're in this sector for many, many years now, but you're now there as the local representative and the local contact so that people can reach out to you there for the Ukrainian ecosystem. Juhan, Europe?
Well, we have the European Cybersecurity Skills Framework that describes the 12 profiles across cybersecurity. 14 member states have already adopted it. Ukraine has adopted it. A number of training institutions, ISACA, IC Square, have adopted it. So look into it. You will definitely have a role to play in cybersecurity in whichever background you have. And I totally agree. We need a diverse set of skills in cybersecurity. It's not a techie subject anymore. So there is an instrument, there is a framework that helps you to get there.
Okay. Good. Here in Estonia?
Well, in Estonia, we are small, 1.3 million people, and the whole system works on who knows who basis. So there's about 3,000 people who are active in information security. They know each other. That's one. But what we actually want to achieve is, when we do the penetration testing, red teaming of the critical infra companies, we always procure this from another company providing this service. And we put the 2 and 2 together, and it's all. I should actually be at one of this reporting right now. It's ongoing, but I'm here on stage, 2 things at once. But the thing what we want is that this relationship to thrive, that the one Estonian company or European company or American company who provides this IT and cyber service would work together with this classic industry company who knows maybe not so much about IT, but is producing its own fair share. And this is where the collaboration, and of course the Ministry of Digital Affairs and Justice and RIA, the National Cybersecurity Center, are very glad to assist and sort of make this happen. But we want private cooperation also to thrive, not just private-public.
Well, thank you very much to the 4 of you for sharing your perspectives on how the cyber conflict is emerging, the real lessons and strategies, things that people can practically do to do this. It's been a fantastic panel. Make sure you connect with Anna, with Juhan, with Phil, or with Gert here later on this afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.